Hello everybody, welcome back to That Fiction Life. Discovery of Witches Season 2 has finally dropped, and it is an adaptation of the All Souls trilogy by Deborah Harkness, who you'll recognise if you followed my early Discovery of Witches content as I interviewed her and we spoke about the series and the book. So Season 2 is following on from the very good cliffhanger of Season 1, where we see Diana and Matthew time walk to Elizabethan London. Now in this video we're going to go through the entire season episode by episode, so if you have not caught up or if you want to hear my thoughts on specific episodes, all the timestamps are in the description so you can navigate it very easily. But before we do dive into those, I'm going to give you a very quick spoiler-free review, as I know a lot of people have been waiting for my thoughts on this series. So this season is technically an adaptation of Shadow of Night by Deborah Harkness, but something very unexpected that happened is they tried to weave in a lot of aspects from Book of Life, which is the third book in the series. We have to start with talking about the costumes and the set design, because this is something I actually followed right from when production began, and we were given so many sneak peeks. The details of all the garments looked so authentic and you felt as though you're right there in 1590. The music this season was holy. Rob Lowe, who worked on the soundtrack, round of applause because it was beautiful. Each scene was almost told through the score. Now Marcus was undoubtedly the highlight of the season for me. Quite a bit of his plotline from the Book of Life was brought into the story, but he also has quite an intense story and I love his personality. I think he's such a great screen presence, and Edward Bluemel is exceptional as the character. And I also think we see the best growth from him in this season. Sky's very good at adapting books. I truly think you could watch this series without having read the book, which is immensely hard to do, especially in a very detailed book. I also think as a reader it's very hard to let go of the source material because it's something that you've read so carefully and you want every single aspect to be shown on screen. But I really commend the writing here, because in terms of pulling out the key moments and changing aspects to suit a visual medium was done to such a great standard. The pacing was also a choice. Chronologically, it was a whole jumble in my head because, as I said, you know, someone who's read the book, they're waiting for specific things to play out and they just didn't. We meet certain characters way later than I think we should have, meaning that you're sort of playing catch up right at the end, trying to tie up loose ends. The casting was brilliant. We meet so many new characters and the additions were spot on. Philippe, Kit, Phoebe, my favourite new characters. I think they were all phenomenally portrayed. Overall, this was quite a spot-on adaptation. So much was changed. I'm not trying to tiptoe around that, but all the choices made sense. While I do think that too much was brought in from the third book, it was a necessity. So that's what I'm going to say for no spoilers. So without further ado, we're going to dive into each of the episodes, starting with episode 1. Matthew and Diana arrive in 1590. This set is my favourite. It's exactly how I imagined it when I was reading the book. You could see all the details that went into making this feel atmospheric, and anytime any character walked through this part of the city, it was an experience. The nods to history throughout this episode were very good Easter eggs for historians and writers. We know that Matthew took the name of Matthew Royden, and if you recall, he's one of the members of the School of Night, and Matthew Royden is the only one that we know nothing about, which is so interesting because this is how Deborah Harkness was able to alter the history to fit her fantasy version. And the reason we know nothing about Matthew is because he's a vampire. I love how much this episode nailed Matthew's possessiveness. And Matthew Good's acting in all of those scenes where he's being almost dismissive of Diana, so good. I love the scene with Lord Berkeley. I wasn't expecting for him to enter the plotline so very early on, but as I said in the non-spoilers, they really played with the timelines here, and I think it was good that we met him so early on. Your methods of persuasion have been sorely missed. It was such a powerful scene. So we begin to see the Stefan Salvatore version of Matthew, this predatory ripper who is struggling with his bloodlust. There's something very clever about this episode. In the book, We don't know what Matthew was up to. We followed Diana on her little adventures of trying to meet people and change the way she speaks and all of that. Matthew's taking care of business. He's scheming. It's a great asset to this adaptation as a whole to get a different point of view. So this is a very solid first episode. Usually the season opener is there just to set the scene. This was filled with so much crucial information about Matthew's past and what he's actually doing 1590 before. Now moving on to episode 2, I did not expect to be seeing Satu in this season at all. She's a bit irrelevant at this point. I don't think we needed scenes with her this season. We see Sarah and Em in this episode living in Septor, which I thought was hilarious because anyone trying to get on with Isabeau is just hysterical. Now we have to talk about Mary Sydney. She is so cool, and she's another person from history that we meet. She was one of my favourite additions, and I wish that we saw more of her. The Father Hubbard scene was so haunting and creepy. When they first meet him, and he runs at Diana, and Matthew swoops in on that whole scene was like a performance. I loved it. There are so many scenes like this throughout the season where you're just so captivated in the moment. And so the directing, I have to point out the directing throughout this whole season I thought was great. The way there's a focus on what the side characters are doing in any given scene. Kit's scenes are a very good example of this because he may not be participating in the scene, but you see his emotions. And so any camera changes to people's reactions to what is happening presently was so good. This episode is actually where I fell in love with Kit. I think he's such a complex character. He's careful and reserved but impulsive when he needs to be. The scene where he's talking to Matthew particularly about his future. You will not draw me on your future, Kit. That way madness lies. No man should know his future. And then Kit comes back with, yet you know mine. And that was a moment. So Matthew in this whole episode continues to be his detached self. The scene where he talks to Diana about the witch trials and she says to him, oh, you know, Jack seems to be fitting and well. And Matthew comes back with, I'm glad to hear it. And he just keeps on reading his little papers. He's almost dismissive of her. He kind of made me really hate him. And that was the point because that's the feeling I had in the book as well. Honestly, these moments were adapted so well. Another Kit moment from this episode that I loved is when they're talking about what to do with the prisoner because Matthew's actions are making the Queen quite angsty and Kit is telling Matthew to take his duties seriously. I adored the line where he says, take my counsel. I can't get over the high quality of writing. I've seen people say that this season is boring, but that's nothing to do with the adaptation. You know, they try to make it more exciting by adding so many elements of Book of Life. But given what the source material was quite toned down, I think they elevated it so well and they included these lines that really kind of made you feel, kind of immerse yourself in the scene. And this is something that I will talk about a little bit later on, but I think the viewing experience of each individual scene was great. Episode 3, we go to Oxford. I love Oxford as a setting. I think the architecture is perfect for this kind of TV show because it's modern, but it feels very authentic and quite ornate, which you need for a fantasy series. I think this was a very important episode in terms of showing us Matthew's struggle. He took a lot of risks and you feel it all being too much for him, and you don't expect that from this very pretentious vampire that we have in season 1 who has his whole life together. I know he's being dismissive of Diana, but I think the pressure that's on him right now, he doesn't have to just think about himself anymore. He has his mates to think of. Dr. D's house reminded me so much of Lallybrock from Outlander, and this whole episode actually felt like I was watching Outlander because they're traveling on horseback to all these different locations. Okay, so we also meet the Queen Elizabeth I in this episode, and I thought that part would be so much grander than it was. I expected this to be like some sort of play. They're announced to the Queen, they walk through the palace, but they kind of just walk into the room and she's just sitting there. I just thought it would be more. When they leave, I thought, oh, that's it. I love the scene with the tree. I think it was so beautiful. I quite like the special effects in the series. So many magic focused series will feel so cringy and you kind of think, oh, you know, Shadowhunter type stuff is becoming more popular for some reason. in terms of how they show magic, but here they feel quite authentic. I like that they don't look too sci-fi and over the top. You know, again, with Matthew being this almighty husband again, you know, the atmosphere in the house changes because apparently someone has broken in, and Matthew points his finger at Diana, you know, stay there. No, sir. Well, this is when we meet Gallaglass, and I know I said Marcus is my favourite character, but I'm just talking about the main cast, okay? As far as new characters go, Gallaglass is everything. We didn't have nearly enough of him this season. Stephen Cree is so passionate about his role, and it makes me love him even more. He embodied what Gallaglass is supposed to be, and his entrance was everything I hoped for. Okay, so episode 4. There is no Diana or Matthew in this whole episode, which that's bold, but I loved it. I think this episode is my favourite if we're going to pick favourite episodes. However, having said that, we're nearly halfway through the season and we were missing quite a lot of the key character development scenes. So you didn't have Diana inserting herself into history. We know she kept a lot of diaries in the book, which made it into current day, and I think that needed to be highlighted a bit more. So my favourite scene in Shadow of Night was actually the auction house scene with Marcus. I love Elizabethan London so much. I am absolutely living for Marcus and Phoebe. When he says, oh, you should be in charge here, when he offers her 200,000 for the portraits, they have amazing chemistry. I think Phoebe's casting is so spot on, and for someone that's not a big part of Shadow of Night, I didn't expect her to make such a big impression on me, but she was in this season so much more, and I really think that was the right choice. Having said that though, the scene where Marcus tells Phoebe that he's a vampire, there's a psychopath murdering people, which is actually something that I forgot to talk about, but that's what the episode opens with. And you, Marcus, you tell your one-night stand that you're a vampire? I mean, good plan. I cackled later on where he's talking to Isabeau and she says, well, now you have to kill her. That was everything I ever wanted. I love their relationship. Quite a lot of the times, even in season 1, he's having secret phone calls with Isabeau about everything going on. And you really saw a different side to Marcus in this whole episode, really. He really comes into his own, and he's not just there to make jokes on the side. I think we often forget that he is this very accomplished doctor, and I adored the scene where Miriam is analysing Sophie's medical results and she calls Marcus in for his expert opinion. I adore seeing him in his element. I think we saw a much more caring side to him. I adored all those little snippets where he's being really reflective and actually thinking about what's going on, and his desperation to make the Knights of Lazarus better and to utilise what they're doing in the current climate. Something that I didn't expect to come out of this episode was me getting an answer to social media and vampires. I truly think a lot of books and TV shows that happened sort of pre-social media blowing up could not happen now. Twitter would find you out and there would be no hiding this. So I quite liked that Javert and Knox were considering this. Episode 5, we're off to see Philippe. I did not expect this plot point to occur so late in the season. I thought episode 3 would be heading off to see Philippe. And of course the reasons for why they have to go there are very different. So in the book, Diana's actually accused of being a witch by someone that she entrusted. That little bit of danger looming, and Philippe also needs Matthew to confirm that he's alive. The build up to meeting Philippe was so emotional for me because he's one of my favourite characters, and another favourite section from the book is everything except her. I low-key think that Deborah Harkness wrote this whole book just so we could meet Philippe. Again, this is another scene that felt like a performance. The most somber atmosphere. And him being in his office was such a huge plot point because in season 1, we know that it's a big deal whenever anyone goes into Philippe's office because it's almost sacred ground. Diana finding out about the whole marriage thing and as to why they haven't consummated it was everything. I loved that scene so much. I loved her outburst. She's quite a collected character, I find. There's not an abundance of things that can shock you in an adaptation of a book that you've already read because you know most of what's about to happen. Another highlight of this episode was when Philippe gives Diana the keys to the house. And she's low-key offended, like, I'm not going to be cleaning around, what do you mean? And then he explains the sentiment and how it's more of a symbolic gesture that he respects her, and since she's the highest lady ranking in the house, he's giving her the keys. I love that part in the book, so I'm so glad that they kept that in. I also really loved the line, "Oh, we do not lock up books in this house," and he takes her to the library. Such a precious moment. It was beautiful. I actually really like this episode because it has so many key scenes. Another is the witch coming to Septor, seemingly to help Diana, but instead threatens to steal her memories. It's so funny when Matthew comes to save her. She's sort of thinking, it's okay, boo, I've got it. So episode 6, I think, is the most emotionally taxing episode because so many scenes actually broke my soul. Starting with Matthew confessing to Diana that he's the one that killed Philippe. I will never forget reading that in the book. I think the Philippe plotline wrapped up too quickly. We had the wedding, a little heart-to-heart with Matthew when he forgives him. Can we just... And this is weirdly something that season 1 also lacked. The parts in Septor were my favourite in the book, just like in the second one. And it was the shortest part of the season. I think they spent too long in Oxford in season 1. I think my favourite scene from this episode, however, was when Philippe was writing his letter to Isabeau. The sombre atmosphere, the setup of this whole scene from a filmmaking perspective, you know, jumping to Isabeau, then finding it. Okay, episode 7, we go to Prague. I loved how condensed this part was. And again, it shows how good Sky is at adaptations because truly, as much as I loved exploring all the history in this book, a lot of it was quite unnecessary in terms of moving the plot along. Or the whole part with Diana being in that play in the book. The scenes with the Emperor particularly were so condensed in order to primarily be able to see all the artifacts he's collected and to find Ashmore 782. I love the scene where the Emperor calls on the goddess and Gallowglass goes to tell Diana Matthew. He asks for the goddess and I assume that's not you, Matthew. I love Gallowglass. I think there should be an entire book about him. And I know there's one in the works, so I'm so excited. Something I loved about this episode is that we were able to see Gallowglass actually try and steal the book. In Shadow of Night, he randomly runs in from somewhere and he says, oh, you know, I tried to steal the book. Here you go. So again, taking us behind the scenes. So up until this point, we were sort of lacking in the vampire content. And I think I often forget that this is supposed to be a fantasy series about dangerous, murdering creatures. So I really like the scene where Matthew is caught in a bloodlust and Diana refuses to leave. Another favourite part was when they're at the party at the Emperor's palace and Diana brings the snake to life. Gallowglass and Matthew had the most iconic reactions to that when they sort of look on like, what the hell is happening? I thought that was so funny. See, this is what I mean about the camera angles taking you to different characters to see their reactions. It may seem so futile, but it's such a statement and it always makes me feel really immersed. Okay, now the scene with Kelly, I don't even know what that was. That was the most kind of pathetic vampire behaviour that I've ever seen. So there are two vampires, okay? Gallowglass and Matthew. They're both powerful. You're supposed to be able to run quite fast. But when they were fleeing, it looked like the most uncomfortable, pathetic attempt at an escape that I think I've ever seen. You know, Diana's flailing around screaming at this man to let go of the book. Matthew and Gallowglass throw some people across the pavement. Listen, if Marcus can get ice cream in 1 minute, I'm sure you can get the hell out of there in under 30 seconds, but just saying. Episode 8. Honestly, I just light up every time we see Marcus, and this whole video is low-key me freaking out about his existence. I really love how they utilised the space where he was living for every scene. You know, he's standing above the arch of the house and they're having this argument, but you're kind of looking at the interior of this beautiful penthouse where he's living. It was just like every episode felt such high quality in the way that it was made. But anyway, I think that particularly stood out in this scene. Phoebe telling Domenico that Marcus is the leader of the Knights of Lazarus. I was thinking, girl, what are you doing? And then more I thought about it, I realized that she was testing him. She was trying to figure out whether this was real. The fact that Domenica respected what she said and left her, it's a really good way of confirming to Phoebe that vampires are real and it's not just Marcus going insane. I think Miriam's reaction to the baby being called Margaret deserves some sort of award. It was so funny. I laughed out loud. And Miriam's wardrobe, I would like to rob that. The costume department, I can't get over it. Even in the modern day, I am drooling over the outfits. The highlight of this episode would be no surprise to anyone. Phoebe and Marcus having a heart-to-heart about why he's a doctor and what he's doing in this world and how everything connects and all the history. The way she's intently listening to him is why they have such great chemistry, because you feel their bond. And I think, again, it's really great to see Marcus in such a vulnerable situation because you don't expect him to be warming up to someone so quickly. And I find it really comical that Miriam didn't say anything, because if you recall season 1, Matthew is going crazy over Diana and Miriam says, I'm the only one of us that has mated, I know the signs, why aren't you seeing the signs on your best friend? I died when Baldwin ratted them out to the congregation that there's a witch baby somewhere. Here's the thing, I love Baldwin as an antagonist. I think he's so intriguing. His constant struggle between what to do regarding the de Clermonts, which is where his loyalty is supposed to lie, but he's also head of the congregation. Episode 9, Diana is pregnant. I don't think I expected this to be happening so late. Again with the timelines, I don't know like exactly why that came in so late, but I love the scene where Goody also tells Diana. I actually really loved her character. I haven't talked about her yet, but she had really great presence. She felt like she was a weaver. Now the highlight of this episode was of course Matthew and Queen Elizabeth's scene. The power and the perfection of that scene. As I said, the audience with Diana and Matthew earlier in the season just wasn't my favourite. This scene, I couldn't look away. I was looking at every detail. The fact that it was very simple in terms of the set, you just have Matthew and Queen Elizabeth. When she asks him about the future and he says that she will be known as the greatest British monarch, Gloria, like me as a history buff, that was everything I wanted from that scene. When they call each other Matt and Bess, I was dead, basically, watching that whole segment. You don't really feel as though they had a relationship in this season. In the book, it's delved into a lot more. We meet her quite a few more times. I especially love the line where he says that, you know, your actual shadow never would have disappointed you in this way, but this is the future Matthew. I really liked the Bedlam scene because it showed that darkness of the vampires. And it's something that's not highlighted a lot in this series because I think it does focus on the history and the science of the genetics, as opposed to showing us these ruthless monsters. Now episode 10, which is the final episode of the season. Up until this point I thought, where is Diana's father? There's another key difference here in this whole segment to the book where Stephen Proctor leaves without telling Diana and Matthew. He tells them to go and enjoy and have a date night, and the next day he's gone. Here you fully see him leave and Diana's kind of struggling with that. I love the scene at Septor where all the creatures are dining together. I think it was such an impactful scene. Also when Marcus is talking to Isabeau about Phoebe and she tells him, he said, you made an excellent choice. I know. Holy moment. Favourite scene, I just can't get over it. It was so pure. Oh, a key scene that I didn't think they would even get time for was when Diana gives her blood to Father Hubbard and they have this whole negotiation about why he should even care about Jack and the other Matthew. But Diana kind of bargains for their safety and she caves and we see all those memories coming in. Oh, another powerful scene. I think this finale wasn't the best. However, it had so many great scenes that I think were very important for the core story. Okay, so then we go to Septor for the final ending, and this is where I get mad because it made no sense as to why the final scene with Matthew and Diana was just to see them close the door. In the book, there's like so many more pages of them traveling, and they wreck Marcus's car, and it's quite an endearing scene. And then they make it back to Septor and they see everyone coming out, and they kind of think, oh no, what's happened? Why isn't everyone here? Because we know about the fight. Whereas here, you saw the fight, and that's where it ends, with Isabeau holding the necklace, and you're like, that's it? But having said that, I really like the scene with Marcus and Knox where he says, you know, young bucks should never stay away from the herd, and Marcus says, oh, you know, this is the de Clermont land. You will be starting a war if you kill me. And Knox leaves. I found that to be a really great scene because, again, it highlights this kind of respect that the creatures have for certain things. Like when Domenico was talking to Phoebe and she uses the Knights of Lazarus and he leaves because he respects their existence. Here again, Knox knows that this is the Clermont land. He doesn't want to stir any more trouble, so he leaves, kind of showing the hierarchy between all the creatures. I just found it an odd moment to finish the season because it makes you think, so what have we actually accomplished? They pretty much end up exactly where they began. They were not allowed to change history, they didn't get the book, and the viewing experience of this reflected exactly that, because each individual episode you're really immersed in all the scenes. But the more that you get through, you kind of think, what is the actual plot? Where is it going? What is the end result? There was no big showdown at the end of the season, where we compare it to season 1. The finale, which was directed by one of my favourite directors, Sarah Walker, she gave us a bang at the end. You felt the stakes getting higher. We still had the same problem that we had at the start. So, I don't know, to me this is a filler season. Overall, what do we think? What do we think of Marcus and Phoebe having such an intense relationship now? Because this is of course something that we don't really see until the 3rd book. I was really shocked that we didn't have the moment with Diana and the goddess, because that's something that's carried on from season 1, where she makes a deal for Matthew's life. And in the book that's quite a big part when we realise that Diana's life is kind of in the goddess's hands and she's going to use her as a tool at some point. I wish that was followed up on. The person that's killing all the people, we know who that is, right? That has to be Benjamin. And we actually meet him in the book where he's talking to Diana, he uses a fake name, but it has to be him, right? Because he's struggling from a blood rage. I don't know why they didn't decide to tell us. I feel like that could have been an actual plot point that would have changed the course of events. So do let me know your theories for that. In conclusion of this very long video, if you've made it this far, congratulations. Also, thank you. So I had a really great, enjoyable experience watching this. I think it was made to a really high standard. The new cast was fantastic. I loved the costumes, the sets, all the scenes with Marcus and Phoebe. I'm never going to stop talking about this. I am thoroughly obsessed with them. So definitely let me know your thoughts. I would love to keep on discussing with you. Have you watched the whole season? There may be some more Discovery of Witches videos coming. I have some ideas to keep on talking about the series. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Bye!